This is the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado is a spontaneous discussion of the issues. Funding for the state of Colorado is provided by the Adolph Coors Foundation, Colorado National Bank, the Monfort Charitable Foundation, and the investment firm of Piper Jaffray and its employees, looking toward the future since 1895. Now, Don Kinney.
Good evening. All of our stories are tied to how your money, taxpayer money, is spent. At the University of Colorado, Fawn Germer, the president is out but will stay, and an interim president is selected. Berny Morson, a former state employee, is paid $400,000 because he was unfairly fired. In the area of tax money spent to propel institutions, Dina Bunn, Buckley, home of the huge golf balls. What happens there? How expensive? Guy Kelly, RTD, which garners a local tax, has leadership squabbles and complaints of management costs. We begin with the top management position at the University of Colorado. Denver Chancellor John Buechner will carry a larger responsibility for several months, maybe longer. Fawn Germer.
Well, so if you're asking me what happened at CU, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of how it works there, is that they have a lot that goes on in secret and a lot happens and you try to piece it together, and just when you think you've got it figured out, it's all different.
The mystery back in August, Judith Albino resigned, was to stay until her contract concluded, but we learned this week a secret agreement was struck.
Right, and I wasn't here for the August meeting, but apparently what happened there was that in secret, the regents were talking with her about an exit that they could arrange that would allow her to save face without them making a public vote against her. And I'm not sure specifically the dates and when she was supposed to be out, but she came out and was very graceful on TV and everything looked fine. It's like she's decided she's not going to seek another term. People speculated that they weren't going to retain her, but I don't think anybody publicly knew that she was going to have to leave before the term ended, and in fact this soon.
And so this week, on the fourth page of a letter, she notes, "I'm gone."
Or the sixth, actually. Yeah, it was like, this, it was a very long statement that recounted many of her successes and where she thinks the university should go, and then the last line did say that. And so it shocked a lot of people, but then when you look back at it and you start talking to people, it shouldn't have. I guess maybe there were more questions that should have been asked.
At the Regents meeting on Thursday, she appeared, did her presidential remarks, and then left.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing I would have liked to have done. But she made her remarks like she would normally do. They have a point in the agenda where the president talks, the chancellors talk, and it's really about the most boring point in the whole meeting, and they talk about a bunch of stuff nobody really cares about. So she said, I'd like to thank my staff, and was very brief about that, and then talked about a couple of trips she had taken, and then got up as though she was going for coffee or to make a phone call, and then the next chancellor gets up, and it's Vince Fulgenetti from the Health Sciences Center, and he says, I have some remarks I'd like to make for President Albino, and there's kind of this silence. He says, well, I guess I'll make them at the end of my presentation. So at the end of his presentation, she's still not there, and there's this silence, and everybody's kind of looking around, and well, they decide they'll go to the next one, and the next one's like, well, I'd like to thank the president, and it went through this whole rotation of every chancellor, the staff reps, the faculty people, and she never came back. And I thought it was kind of an interesting end to her reign there, because here are these regents that have made her life interesting.
You were going to say miserable, weren't you?
Well, interestingly miserable for the last 4.5 years, and that instead of staying for them to say something that she knew probably wasn't the most sincere thing in the world, she just got out of there. So it was kind of good. But I don't know that I would have done it with the media there watching, but it was certainly one of the more entertaining moments I've had at a Regents meeting.
She will now teach or do something at the Health Sciences Center.
Right, and I think that for the time being, what she's going to be doing is looking very hard for another job.
John Buechner now takes over.
Right. And that is going to be extremely interesting, I think, because everybody loves Buechner. I mean, he's a great guy. You talk to people in the legislature who need to have a good relationship with him, and you know they love him. People on campus seem to love him. The regents seem very fond of him, and I think it's going to be a good interim time. Now, Buechner was very careful the day before the announcement was made to point out that at CU there is no such thing as an interim president. That by constitution there it is the president, and but you know, is it an interim? I mean, they have a search committee going at the same time for a permanent replacement. And I don't know, and I don't know if he will get that.
So technically, he's the president on an interim basis.
Well, we can say that, but he wouldn't say that. He would say, I'm the 18th president of CU.
John Buechner is a longtime affiliate of the university, nearly 30 years. Politically, he is one of those fellows who has always been at the right place.
Yeah, and always has seemed to have done well with it.
Well, he's been at
And Bernie Morson?
Well, he's been at the right place, but he was passed over for president several times. He was aced out by people who came in from other parts of the country on these searches. He's an interesting guy. He's been around a long time. He's a former member of the legislature. He's a Republican, a moderate Republican, and he sort of goes back to a piece of the Republican Party that is becoming increasingly scarce. Civic-minded Republicans, people who like education, who believe in moderate funding increases once in a while, as opposed to the more stridently right-wing Republicans who you see, Newt Gingrich, for example, have taken over. John is more in the tradition of Sandy Arnold and Les Fowler, who were powerful at the legislature quite a few years ago, also from Boulder. So he kind of harkens back to something that we haven't seen at the legislature or in the university for a while.
And Fawn Germer, you wrote a little sidebar story about how the politicians at the State House are pretty enthusiastic about John Buechner.
Oh, you know, that was the easiest sidebar that I've written all year, because, you know, how long does it take you to get response from the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President normally in a day's time? Well, this took about 5 minutes because they were so anxious to say good things about him. Chuck Berry, the Speaker of the House, says, you know, that Buechner is one of the reasons he's in politics in the first place. And so, yeah, they love him.
So if John Buechner were to say, I want to be president on a permanent basis, will he get fast consideration?
I'm sure he's going to get consideration. Who knows what the regents do? I mean, you know, see, look how they got their last president. They went through a search. They paid $85,000. They get their finalists, and then they go into a secret meeting and they pick Judith Albino, who wasn't on the list. So, who knows?
Fawn Germer of the Rocky Mountain News. Let us go back to Bernie Morson. There is a topic of a state employee who was fired. He contests that, says it was done unfairly, and in fact, he's paid $400,000.
Well, we have a law in Colorado. It's called the Whistleblowers Law. And if you uncover corruption in state government while you are an employee of an agency and they take action against you by firing or demoting you, you can go to court and you can win. Well, the state had to pay $400,000 to a fellow named David Smink, who lives out in Littleton now. He was an employee of the Oil and Gas Commission, which is one of those obscure agencies that the press very rarely covers because it's usually boring. But he discovered that when oil companies abandoned oil wells, they were not plugging them properly. And this is a topic most people don't have a great deal of interest in. It has to do with how much cement you put down the well,
so
and
nothing
how
will come
far
up.
down. Yes, how far down you have to put it. And he claimed that for the last bunch of years, maybe decades, that they'd been doing it wrong because it's cheaper for the oil companies to put in less cement and not put it down as far.
Or not putting any in at all.
There were some cases where there was a real dearth of cement in some of these wells. But he found, for his troubles, he was roundly attacked by the oil industry. Some oil executives took the director of the Oil Commission out to lunch at a very exclusive club. And when they came out of lunch, they had sort of written David Smink out of the process. The oil companies could then go to the director directly, and he would overrule anything that the staff said.
Smink was out in the field saying, you've got to do a better job here, and it evolved to, apparently, they just ignored him.
Yeah, well, it was worse than that. One of the people who worked for Smink, he was a middle-level supervisor of these inspectors, and one of these inspectors was out at a well out in Morgan County, and they were plugging this well with cement, and the inspector said, you have to put in so much cement. And the owner of the well goes to the phone and he calls up the director at home at 7:30 in the morning. He calls the director of the Oil and Gas Commission at home, and comes back and says, well, I don't have to put in that much cement anymore. Your boss says I can do what I want, essentially. And
his boss, it was at that time Dennis Bicknell?
Yes. He's retired since. This was an odd kind of thing. He retired, and there's pretty good evidence that people higher up in the Department of Natural Resources, which is over the Oil and Gas Commission, realized that this agency was very cozy with the industry it regulates. They clearly wanted him out, and there are documents that we came across which show this. But after he was out, they brought him back to fire this guy Smink. They hired him as a consultant. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what happened.
In recent years, there have been a number of occasions where people in the rural parts of the state have complained, hey, these wells are doing real damage to our water.
There is a real gap between the oil industry and agriculture. In many cases, the farmer owns the surface rights, but not the oil underneath, and then you get the oil people tramping across the crops to dig a well. So there's a lot of friction there to begin with. And then you get the situation where every once in a while someone turns on a tap and out comes a mixture of water and methane. There have been instances in this state where people could put a match to their water and light it, which is very, that's kind of unusual.
Disconcerting.
Yeah, and then a number of years, this is going back a little ways, but in 1984, I think it was, a lumberyard exploded in LaSalle because this gas was leaking out of a nearby well and coming out through the fissures in the rock, and it came in under this lumberyard. The whole thing exploded.
You noted in your two-part series the agency is more sensitive now to other views.
Yes, they seem to be including farmers and environmentalists on some of the committees that are rewriting the regulations. There's a lot of wariness because the farmers and the environmentalists aren't sure, that how far they're going to get yet. They want to see what the final process is, and some of the people in the oil industry are wary because suddenly they have these farmers writing rules about their business. No one likes that.
Berny Morson, another topic ever so briefly. Lots of stories the last couple of weeks about environmental tests and the state sending through some rigged cars.
Yes, what happened was in the State Revenue Department has a bunch of unmarked cars. They get driven through covertly by inspectors, and they see if the people at EnviroTest can recognize some very obvious faults that they're supposed to catch visually, one of which